Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. The Void is one of my favorite forces in WoW, from both a thematic and aesthetic perspective. However, it is also the most prolific antagonistic force we contend with. Like, ridiculously prolific. It's straight up overused, and suffers as a narrative tool as a result. In this video, I'll first do a rundown of all of the prominent roles the Void has played in WoW, though I'm sure I'll miss some, then go over why it's used as often as it is, and finally touch on why this is to its detriment and what solutions there are to it all. First off, vanilla. Due to how much this iteration of the game focused on small-scale localized stories, it's entirely likely that I'm missing something here. Still, any mentions of the Void were surely minor. I can think of two main exceptions. First, the Master's Glaive in Darkshore, which, due to its cephalopod-shaped skeleton, evoked Cthulhu imagery, and thus heavy speculation as the potential remains of an old god. This would later be elaborated on in Hearthstone's Whispers of the Old Gods expansion as being the remains of the Naraki Herald, Sogoth the Slitherer, basically a high-ranking subordinate of the old gods. He would also be partially revived during the 8.1 Darkshore quests, where he could then be killed. And, most notably, we had all of the Silithid content throughout southern Kalimdor that led up to the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj and its final boss, the Old God Cthulhu. In the Burning Crusade, there was the notorious Shadowmoon Valley quote-unquote old god that Arakoa cultists attempted to summon, though that was never really elaborated on. More importantly, we had all of the lore surrounding the Ethereals, whose homeworld of Koresh was destroyed by the Void Lord Dementius. During Netherstorm questing, you wind up slaying a fragment of Dementius. We are also introduced to the Naru, beings of holy energy who, if severely damaged or drained, can flip into Dark Naru and even evolve into Void Gods. This is seen with the Naru Mauru, whom the Blood Elves had kidnapped and were draining throughout the expansion as a new source of light magic. He darkens during the Sunwell Plateau raid and serves as the penultimate boss of the expansion, transforming into the Void God Entropius for the second half of the fight. Moving on, with Yogg-Saron having spread his roots quite far underneath Northrend, his presence can be felt in a lot of Wrath of the Lich King's content. First hinted at during the Frozen Thrones Undead campaign, there is a significant presence of old god minions in the underground Nerubian kingdom of Ajal Nerub, which we see primarily through the Ahn'Qiraj dungeon. Much of the dungeon is occupied by Twilight cultists, with the final boss being the Naraki, Herald Village. We can see some of the further reaches of Ajal Nerub with the Icy Depths area beneath the Argent Tournament, and the Nazanak area beneath Icecrown Citadel. Then there is the widespread appearance of Saronite, a very strong metal that was actually the black blood of Yogg-Saron, and which has this side effect of often driving those exposed to it mad. This metal was notably mined in the Pit of Sauron dungeon, and used to construct Icecrown Citadel and other edifices of the zone. Though it isn't really focused on, we have the Furbolg city of Grizzlemaw in Grizzly Hills. This was once a world tree planted by Fandral Steghelm, known as Andrasil, with the intent of counteracting the spread of Saronite, but was ineffective at doing so, and was actually used by Yogg-Saron to infiltrate the Emerald Dream and create the Emerald Nightmare. Deeming it best to cut their losses, they cut down the tree and renamed it Vordrasil. And of course there was Yogg-Saron himself, who managed to corrupt first Loken and later the other keepers of Ulduar, though the latter we managed to redeem in time. The Ulduar raid culminates with us first slaying the Cathraxi, General Vizax, and then Yogg-Saron himself. And lastly, in the final raid of the expansion, the Ruby Sanctum, we face off against Halion, a Twilight Dragon attempting to corrupt the Ruby Dragon Shrine and its Whelplings. As for Cataclysm, the Void is all over this expansion. Like, there's frankly too much to cover here. There are Twilight cultists and old god stuff in dang near all of the zones, as well as Blackrock Caverns and Stonecore. We have Ozumat in Throne of the Tides, we have the entirety of the Bastion of Twilight raid, notably its leader Cho'Gall and Deathwing's consort Sinestra. Both Alakir and Ragnaros have thrown their lot in with the old gods, so by extension all content relating to them can count as well. And of course we have the entire 4.3 Hour of Twilight patch, which features both the Hour of Twilight dungeon and the Dragon Soul raid, which has Void coming out the wazoo. I mean, the wazoo is where Void is supposed to come out of. Of course, Deathwing himself operates as a minion of the old gods, chiefly N'Zoth, after having been driven to madness by them long ago. I know I sort of glossed over a lot here, but it's just literally everywhere, and it's too difficult for me to break it down further. Moving on to Mists of Pandaria, over the course of this expansion, we learned that with his dying gasp, the old god Yasharaj spread the 7 Sha across Pandaria, cursing the land to always have to face the physical manifestations of their negative emotions. We had the Sha of Doubt in the Jade Forest, the Sha of Despair in Crossrang Wilds, the Shas of Anger and Violence in Kunlai Summit, the Sha of Hatred in Townlong Steppes, the Sha of Fear in the Terrace of the Endless Spring, and the Sha of Pride in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. The Sha of Fear in particular was also responsible for Empress Shek'Zir mobilizing the Mantid forces into a premature breaching of the Serpent's Spine. Related to that, we also know that the Mantid as a whole serve the old gods, though not the Sha. This is evidenced by the Klaxi, who are loyal to Yasharaj but oppose Shek'Zir's actions, which were motivated by the Sha of Fear. Yasharaj's heart was discovered beneath the veil and revitalized by Garrosh Hellscream when he immersed it in the pools, corrupting the veil. He then took it back to the Underhold of Orgrimmar and would harness its power. The Paragons of the Klaxi would choose to serve both him and the heart. Notably, the Sha of Pride also served as the reason for Pandaria's mists in the first place, as it was Shao Hao's pride that caused him to hide his homeland away from the rest of the world. In Warlords of Draenor, the Void is present yet again. On the one hand, we have the AU version of Cho'Gall and his minions, who had a mild presence throughout the leveling quests. He winds up controlling the Pale, orcs who have devolved into being completely unable to abide the light. He also drains power from the Naru K'ure beneath Oshugun, causing it to darken and evolve into the Void Lord Decimatus. His machinations come to a head in the Heimal raid, where he assaults the Ogre stronghold with his Void forces and, on Mythic difficulty, he kills Imperator Margok by draining his power before turning on the raid, only to fall himself. We also have everything that occurs in Shadowmoon Valley revolving around Ner'zhul and the Shadowmoon clan. Basically, when Oshugun crashed, the Naru Ka'ara was injured and became the Dark Star. Pressured to provide strength to the Iron Horde, Ner'zhul would guide his clan to use the Dark Star to access Void magic. AU Velen sacrificed himself to purify Ka'ara, though the Shadowmoon still had lesser access to the Void. They would face off against us in the Shadowmoon Burial Grounds dungeon, where they would meet their demise. In Legion, the Void takes a relatively minor role, as you would hope, considering it's supposed to be all about dealing a death blow to the Legion. Still, we certainly aren't starved. First, we have the introduction of Xal'atath as the Shadow Priest artifact. The Emerald Nightmare raid owes its existence to Yogg-Saron's tampering, and of particular note was the boss Il'gynoth, who famously gave us his whispers to stew over until the end of time. The Void also serves as a bit of a backdrop for unlocking the Fathom Dweller mount. And with patch 7.3, we have the return of Turalyon and Ilaria to the story, the latter of whom we discover has begun using the Void as a power source. She owes much of her abilities to the tutelage of the ethereal Locust Walker. The two of them converge on the seat of the Triumvirate dungeon in opposition to the Shadowguard ethereals, and put down the darkened Naru, Laura, whose essence Illyria absorbs. It is also prevalent in allied race unlocks. High Mountain Tauren discover that the reason kobolds value candles so highly is to ward off the darkness, a literal void entity. The Void assaults the Sunwell when Ilaria comes too close to it, and of course we have the entire Void Elf allied race led by Magister Umbric. Battle for Azeroth was another expansion absolutely rife with the Void. There is some clear influence over the culture of Kultiran Tidespeakers, particularly throughout Stormsong Valley and the Shrine of the Storm dungeon, where Lord Stormsong is shown to have fallen into the service of Queen Azshara. Of course, the Naga as a race owe their existence to N'Zoth's influence, so I could have been crediting them as Void content all this time, but that would have been excessive. Right next to the shrine, we have the Crucible of Storms with its two bosses, the Restless Cabal and Unat. We also come face to eye with N'Zoth here, particularly during a questline where we help release Xal'atath from her dagger and give her a body to work with. Over on Zandalar, we have everything relating to Uldir. The Titans had attempted to create an artificial old god they could study named Gahun. Though much less powerful than the real deal, he was nevertheless a massive threat, particularly his mastery over Rot. We also had the Cathrax general Mithrax as the penultimate boss. Patch 8.2 brought us to Najatar to contend with the Jara, who of course had extremely close ties to N'Zoth, the two of them having struck a bargain back during the Sundering and working in tandem ever since. In what has become a bit of a trend, we get another Old God Harbinger as the penultimate boss, this time the Naraki Zakul, before facing Najara herself. She goads us into unleashing our Azerite during the fight, and thus unshackling N'Zoth from his underwater prison. At the conclusion of the fight, he steals her away, leading us into patch 8.3. This is the voidiest patch yet, with the Black Empire forces assaulting both Uldum and the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. We ready ourselves to resist N'Zoth's whispers by entering into horrific visions of Stormwind and Orgrimmar and empowering our Ashrak Hamas legendary cloak. The raid brings us into Nyalotha itself, the once sleeping and now waking city. We face many old god forces here, notably the corrupted keeper Ra-Den and Il'gynoth in his true form. We free Ajara from Dark Inquisitor Zanesh and are rewarded with the Black Blade that once housed Xal'atath. Wrathion uses this to critically injure N'Zoth before we engage him in battle and ultimately kill him with a giant Azerite laser beam. As for Shadowlands, amazingly, this is the only expansion that leaves the Void practically untouched. There are some Bastion quests where you relive a Void attack on the zone, and there are scant mentions of it throughout as one of the cosmic forces at war with death, but it's never really given any focus. Frankly, I'm impressed. Well done, Shadowlands. In Dragonflight, the Void returns, though in a relatively minor capacity. As we venture into Zaralek Caverns, Wrathion and Sibelian note its whispers starting to claw at their minds in the same way they once did to Neltharion. We find a lot of Void stuff in the depths of the Aberrus raid, where Sarkareth chooses to embrace its power the same way his creator did, and then dies. Furthermore, in the Dawn of the Infinite dungeon, we see that Iridikron has obtained the Dark Heart and is gifting it to a Void elf-shaped entity. And moving into the War Within, once again the Void is at the forefront, led this time by said Void elf-shaped entity, Xal'atath. She continuously taunts Ilaria into pursuing her. Locust Walker reveals that the Radiant Song that many on Azeroth hear mirrors what happened to his people before Koresh was destroyed. Xal'atath infiltrates the Kirin Tor under the guise of Dresden and uses this opening to obliterate Dalaran and absorb much of its arcane energy into the Dark Heart, supposedly killing Khadgar. We find out that she has enlisted much of the Kahedi Nerubians by influencing their princess Ansarek to betray her mother Neferes. The Void are present in all 4 initial zones of the War Within, either through the Sareki Nerubians, Void-addled Earthen known as Skarden, or outright cultists. They are present in nearly all of the dungeons, including a return of the Darkness in Darkflame Cleft. We encounter Xal'atath in Hallowfall, where we learn that she wanted us to slaughter the Nerubians. She herself is draining Void energy from Beledar until interrupted by Ilaria, who manages to crack the Dark Heart and release Khadgar, who had transmuted himself to survive. In the Undermined patch, Xal'atath makes a deal with Galliwix. In exchange for giving him access to the Black Blood, he would repair the Dark Heart for her using Kajamite and Goblin science. However, during the campaign, the Dark Heart is stolen by the Shadowguard Ethereal, Phase Thief Azir, much to Xal'atath's chagrin, who we find out is not affiliated with them. And though I've tried not to spoil myself too much, I do know in 11.1.7 we find out more about the history of Xal'atath, including the conflict that she evidently had with the old gods. And of course, it seems very likely that in 11.2 we'll be heading to Koresh or some other ethereal-related content. And lastly, we have Midnight. Though we only know the bare bones of what the expansion entails, those bare bones are that the Void is attacking Quel'Thalas. Heck, the logo is purple. It could potentially serve as a Deathblow expansion to the Void, the way that Legion did to the Legion, but let's not assume anything. Either way, it may be the most Void-centric expansion yet. Wow, that wound up being much, much longer than even I anticipated. If it wasn't obvious, Blizzard loves using the Void. A lot. But just why is it so dang prominent? Well, there are 3 fairly simple reasons. First, it gets to double dip on aesthetics. The Void can generally be divided into 2 design flavors. You have the very shadow-oriented stuff, usually explored through Darkened Naru and the Void Lords, but you also have the more fleshy stuff associated with the old gods and their minions. This allows the Void to occupy almost twice as many storylines because the two are often treated as separate plot threads. Compare this to the Fel, which is pretty much demons, with a bit of machinery thrown in. The second reason is the classic imagery and themes of light versus darkness. It's a dichotomy as old as time. Where there is light and the quintessentially good, there is darkness and the quintessentially bad. Warcraft does like to dabble with the concept of each of its cosmic forces being sinister in their own way, including making the light oppressive. But it's hard to deny that they still often default to light good, void bad. When the light is bad, it's seen as an exception, such as the Scarlet Crusade or Zira, and her non-con approach to things. When the void is okay, it's seen as an exception, such as Illyria, Ethereals, and Void Elves, using it as a tool for the greater good, and even then, they must struggle not to be consumed by it. So, when you have a cosmic force that essentially embodies the ancient concept of evil, it's understandable that they would default to it when needing bad guys. And the third and most simple reason, it's fun, particularly when it comes to writing anything surrounding the old gods, as their design leans heavily on Lovecraftian elements. Cosmic horror is an extremely appealing genre. I myself am a fan of both Lovecraft and his contemporaries' literary works. I love the mythos surrounding Bloodborne. I love Uzumaki by Junji Ito. I love Madoka Magica. Eldritch abominations and the mysteries surrounding their existence is just super enticing. This is evidenced with the ample use of whispers in the game, such as through Il'gynoth or the puzzle box of Yogg-Saron. There's also the fun of writing characters who are losing their grip on sanity. And on top of all of that, there's an inherent eroticism to it all. So, if the Void is so useful as a faction in the game, and so fun, why is it a bad thing that it's used so heavily? Why is any of this actually even a concern at all? Well, again, the answers to that are simple but poignant. Obviously, there is burnout. You simply cannot keep throwing the same thing at us without us growing weary of it. A common complaint during Warlords of Draenor was that we were experiencing orc fatigue, which is fair, as we were coming off of over a year of Siege of Orgrimmar, and then spent an entire expansion with heavy orc representation. But it's almost laughable by comparison to the Void at this point. As much as I and others may enjoy the Void, I don't think any of us are happy that it's been heavily featured for 11 of WoW's first 12 versions. And the other main drawback is that cosmic horror diminishes with focus and explanation. Lovecraft himself put it best when he stated that the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. Well, the more you shine a light on something, the less unknown it's going to be. There's a reason his longest work is only 51,000 words long, and the bulk of his work comes in at less than 18,000. If anything, the Void should be the cosmic force in WoW that is most on the fringes, that gets the least attention, but instead, we have the opposite. Now, I'm no purist. I don't think cosmic horror or Lovecraftian elements have to be handled a certain way. It's not like I wake up at night in a cold sweat because there's a romantic comedy anime about Nyarlathotep taking the form of a cute schoolgirl. Blizzard is free to use these designs and concepts as they wish, and I don't think they're wrong for wanting them to be more front and center. And frankly, I think it's good not to leave oneself beholden to such stiff expectations. Let us not stifle creativity. But there's a limit. A point where the pretense of the Void being fearsome and unknowable starts to break down. I actually think it was handled best in Vanilla and Wrath, where the Old God presence was, yes, prolific, but subtle. Cthulhu and Yogg-Saron both made their impacts, though in ways largely confined to their geographic regions. They were overt enough threats that we had to deal with them as raid bosses, but neither served as the final bosses of their expansions, and in that sense almost kept the Void under the radar. I also think Mop utilized them well, though in a different way since Y'Shaarj himself was already dead. So, with all that in mind, what do I think the solution is? Well, it's too late now, but I definitely would have dialed back use of the Void. Deathwing didn't have to be written as a servant of the old gods. There would have been nothing wrong with him simply being a strong and evil dragon, but instead we got Void stuff all over Cataclysm. Making that change would have also removed any presence of the Void from Dragonflight. And there's a lot I would have changed about Battle for Azeroth. 8.2 and 8.3 shouldn't have been patches in that expansion, for starters. How bad is it when we can't even have a faction war expansion without it devolving into another Void story? Save them for later. And though I love Xalatath as a villain, I'll have to wait and see how I feel about the War Within and Midnight's Void narrative. Is it something we really need to be focusing on? Time will tell. And more broadly speaking, the answer to this oversaturation couldn't be more obvious. Use your other tools. There are 6 cosmic forces in modern WoW, yet the Void gets the lion's share of the attention. Light, order, and life tend to get very little shine, especially as antagonistic entities. And of course, not everything in WoW has to be tied to the cosmic forces. More terrestrial characters and storylines are not only welcome, but desperately needed at this point. In sum, the Void is great, particularly the fleshy, tentacle-y bits. But Blizzard have historically fallen back on it entirely too often, and should endeavor to avoid doing so in the future. It's understandable how we got here though, as the Void is just that alluring. It's meta-narratively fitting that Blizzard has also found themselves unable to resist the temptations of the Void. For this week's drawing, I had my pick of pretty much any character associated with the Void. So I decided to go with one of the old gods that I don't have plans to draw for any other video, and that would be Yogg-Saron. I had a ton of fun drawing him. It's nice to occasionally get away from humanoids. And he's enjoyable enough as a character. I wouldn't say he's particularly deep as a character. None of the old gods really seem to be, save for possibly N'Zoth, but none of them really need to be. Their main purpose is to be mysterious eldritch abominations that we beat up for loot, while also providing whispers for the fanbase to spend the next 20 years speculating over. And Yogg-Saron really epitomizes something I loved about early old god design, which was just taking a body part and putting a lot of emphasis on it. You had Cthulhu with the giant eye and a bunch of smaller eyes. Here you have Yogg-Saron with a giant mouth and a bunch of smaller mouths. And then that theme kind of goes away thereafter. I mean, you could maybe say N'Zoth is the tentacle-focused old god, although missed opportunity to go for no Zoth. But Y'Shaarj doesn't really fit the theme at all. I mean, he's said to have 7 heads, but that hasn't been shown in any of the artwork we've gotten of him, and frankly, it's probably just a roundabout way of describing the 7 Shah. And yeah, I obviously drew him in his prison in the basement of Ulduar. It's not like there's many other places he would be going. I also added some shadowy cultists for scale, and tried to depict him as closer to the size he often appears in art and fan art, instead of the relatively reined-in size he has in the game, since, you need to be able to maneuver around him for his actual boss fight. But overall, I was pretty satisfied with how he turned out. That ought to do it for this video though, so thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye-bye-bye-bye-bye.